the individual speakers and do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Sheranian Communications, KHQN, or Utah Valley Live.
And welcome to It's Not Your Fault, hosted by Steve Shank and co-hosted by me, Kim Power-Stilson. We're here live on KHQN, 1480 AM and Utah Valley Live. You can find us on Facebook at It's Not Your Fault. It's Not Your Fault on Facebook. Steve, welcome back. Aloha.
Well, thank you for bringing me back or letting me come. I was wondering whether you'd allow me to come back on after the last show.
Yes. Oh, yes. We had lots of interest in the last show. Thank you, by the way, for all those people who liked the show.
Well, that's a good thing. At least 3 people were watching. Thank you. 1, 2, and 3. Appreciate you.
Actually, we had a record number of likes on that show. So we topped just over good. 200. So
really? That's not bad for a start.
Yeah, it's not bad for a start. We want to reach the whole world.
Next week it'll be 2,000, right?
It will roll that way, I hope, yes.
You have to, when people are giving advice, you have to have at least 2,000 people out there to get to an adequate lynch mob.
So our goal is to get 2,000 for a lynch mob. You know, and Steve, your book, again, this show, for those of you tuning in for the first time or those of you watching for the first time, this show is based on Steve Shank's book. Now, this is Steve Shank. He is a food expert. He has been in industry for 30 years. He has 2 very successful companies, and as well, he's just written this book called It's Not Your Fault, and it's based on, loosely, your experience out in the field, getting to know people, meeting people, and it's a wonderful segmented relationship book that really helps you navigate the waters of finding the magnificence in yourself.
That's true, and the fascinating thing is that everything in life is about relationships, and we live in an approval-based society. If you don't do what I want you to do, I won't approve. And so if I don't approve, then you've got some problems. But the fact is, she's trying to get me to talk into the microphone, and I keep leaning back like this. But I'll fix it.
Just take it with you.
But anyway, this is it's kind of fun because it brings up some laws and some principles that a lot of times people haven't thought of quite the way that they're presented in the book. And so as a result, what you have is as you go along with some of these little principles and some of these laws that just are, I think that a lot of folks are going to have some ahas, and I've seen, a stroke of enlightenment come across your face once in a while. But it's kind of interesting just to see how things work, and most people don't think of it that way. They don't see how things work and put those principles into application in their lives. So that's what the book is about, and it's kind of fun.
Okay, well, you've heard it straight from the author's mouth. This book will be available this fall, so coming very soon, as well as a conference coming up in October, so you want to attend that. Now, before we go into the book and the relationship between Michael and the Guardian, you'll want to hear about that. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and after we return, we will listen to Steve Shank as he talks about how it's not our fault. We'll be right back with more after this.
Folks, have you ever realized that freedom is spelled F-O-O-D? Food. After air and water, food is our greatest dependency. Taking control of that dependency ensures personal power, independence, and freedom. We can't control earthquakes, storms, martial law, dollar crash inflation, the global warming hoax, farm and garden restrictive legislation, job loss, crop failures, or the 2012 planet disruptions. However, if we have our own food, none of these can control us. Hunger can never be used to control you if you never are forced to stand in a bread line because you do not have your own bread. It seems the only freedom we still have control of is possession of food. If we don't control our own food, events are rapidly moving to use food to control us. Freedom truly is spelled F-O-O-D. Contact efoodsdirect.com or call 800-409-5633. That's efoodsdirect.com or 800-409-5633.
And welcome back to It's Not Your Fault. Thank you for joining us. We're here with author and host Steve Shank talking about his new book that's coming out this autumn, It's Not Your Fault. So, Steve, for those of those just tuning in or just watching, tell us about this book and why it's important for people.
The book itself is based on just a lot of observations of how things work with relationships. Probably the best way to start out is that if each of us was on our own desert island and we didn't have anybody to hear what we said, see what we did, or know what we thought, there virtually would be no right or wrong. We relate everything to the people around us and relationships and the circumstances we're in. And all societies are completely different. What's right and wrong in Japan is completely different than what's right and wrong here in the United States, and what's good and bad, what's ugly and what's pretty. Just a couple examples, it's really kind of interesting. I've got a good friend that's married to a little Japanese gal. He lived over in Japan for 10 years. And as an American male, I think that those of you out there that are American males know what we are attracted to in American women. But in Japan, a very attractive part of the female body is the nape of the neck, which I look at and I say, okay, don't understand. Now, staying with Japan and China, it used to be that beauty was considered very, very important, but there are certain aspects of beauty that were important. For example, a woman's feet, if she was an aristocrat or a high socially person, which they have a lot of different levels in Japan and things, they treasured small feet to the point that they would bind the little girl's feet and not let them grow, to the point that a lot of times that they were totally useless. They couldn't walk. They had to be carried around. Of course, if they're aristocrats, they could afford it. But this was considered beautiful. We had another situation in early Europe in terms of what's socially acceptable. Men, the fops of the day, the fellows that thought they were quite something, would carry snuff boxes, which had tobacco all chopped up in it, and they'd very ceremoniously reach in and take out their snuff box, and they all had these lace handkerchiefs tucked in their sleeves, okay? And they'd open up the snuff box and take a little pinch of it and go, snort it. And then, because it was, kind of an irritant, it'd make them sneeze and blow their nose, and they'd grab that handkerchief and sneeze. And this was considered, socially really the upper crust if you handled the snuff. And you see, right now, if I was out on a date with a young lady and I reached in and got a snuff box and snorted that stuff a little bit and blew my nose and sneezed, and
I think the lacy hanky would throw them off.
Yeah, the lacy hanky might throw them off, but it wouldn't work. So what the book consists of is looking at what works and what doesn't. The magnificence of people. The fascinating thing is that you take any person, pick somebody that you don't particularly care for. And there's a principle in the book that we talk about that says, to know me is to love me. That's a little bit extreme for some people to accept, but if two people that really don't like each other very well were to actually be locked in a room where they got to know each other's dreams, hopes, fears, wants, needs, and all of the things about them, I would contest the fact, or I would suggest that it's very probable that they come out really actually liking each other, because you can't in depth know another human being, truly know them, without recognizing their magnificence. And the one problem that we have in American society today, in my opinion, and of course everybody has one, they're like noses, unless you're in the Marine Corps. But the fact is that in my opinion, in our society, one of the biggest issues we have is that of self-image, how I feel about myself. And so an awful lot of the principles in the book, every single one of them, are based on relationships. To know me is to love me. I like me best when I'm with you, and these types of things. But I believe that as you look at the relationship-based principles that we talk about in the book, you'll find that each individual is most concerned in their whole life about how they feel about themselves. How well you like me is based on how I make you feel about yourself. If I look at you and go, you're going to say, what's the matter?
Yeah,
What's going
just
on?
in my
What are you
face.
thinking? How come you're, what are you looking at, Or if I look at you and go,
There's a difference, for
There's
sure.
a lot of difference. And so essentially what we have to deal with, and that brings about the concept of Michael and the guardian. This is kind of an old hat concept, but the reason I used it is because it seems to work and people recognize it. Michael is everyman, the guy that's out there that has the questions, that doesn't know how things work, and the guardian is this almost supernatural guru type, teacher type that shows up. And it's based on the principle, in the introduction, it's based on the fact that Michael is sitting there wondering why Murphy's Law applies to him. You're familiar with Murphy and his law that, everything that can go wrong will go wrong at precisely the wrong time. And so
Irish of
he's
you.
contemplating his navel a little bit one day, and all of a sudden there's a flash and a bang, and this guy shows up and says, okay, here's the deal. It's your dime. Well, it used to be a dime. Now it's probably 50 cents, but that you plug into the phone booth. But anyway, he says, it's your dime. What do you want to know? And Michael says, well, what's the deal? And the guardian says, well, there's a law that says when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And it's an absolute law. It's one of these laws that just are. And anybody that has been in a situation where they really needed some answers, and they were really praying about things and wanting to know things, and if they put themselves in the way and prepare themselves and are ready to admit, hey, I don't know the answer, I need help, all of a sudden, from someplace, it's a law, it's a universal law that the teacher has to appear. And so the guardian says, okay, you had a question, I'm the teacher, you're ready, so now you're the student.
So if I understand this right, then Michael is the kind of main center person. He represents every man, like you say. And then the guardian arrives when he's ready to be taught. And so in the book, the guardian walks with Michael through several different life scenarios. Is that about right?
A whole lot of them, yeah.
Okay, there's a lot of them.
They have a lot of examples, and they have a lot of scenarios, but each time the law is ready to be taught, then a scenario comes up where you see someone in that situation, and there's a little bit of a story that goes with it, or Michael asks a question, and then the guardian has a chance to pontificate and be all guardianly.
Well, I actually have read the book, and what I think is very interesting for those of you looking for a new twist. I mean, there's a lot of books out there that are, self-help or relationship books, but some of them just seem to be repetitious. They say the same old thing. What I love about your book, Steve, is that there's so many scenarios that do give me that aha moment. If I have, an hour to read, I want to pick up something that I enjoy, that entertains me, that I learned something from. And we do that in your book. Now, we're going to go to commercial break. And when we get back, Steve's going to talk more about the Michael and the Guardian relationship, as well as maybe you could give us some ideas, some of the topics and subjects in your
we
books.
can do that.
All right. You're listening to It's Not Your Fault. It's a show based on the book by author Steve Shank and host today, Steve Shank, as well as Kim Power-Stilson. We'll be right back with more after this.
Folks, have you ever realized that freedom is spelled F-O-O-D? Food. After air and water, food is our greatest dependency. Taking control of that dependency ensures personal power, independence, and freedom. We can't control earthquakes, storms, martial law, dollar crash inflation, the global warming hoax, farm and garden restrictive legislation, job loss, crop failures, or the 2012 planet disruptions. However, if we have our own food, none of these can control us. Hunger can never be used to control you if you never are forced to stand in a bread line because you do not have your own bread. It seems the only freedom we still have control of is possession of food. If we don't control our own food, events are rapidly moving to use food to control us. Freedom truly is spelled F-O-O-D. Contact efoodsdirect.com or call 800-409-5633. That's efoodsdirect.com or 800-409-5633.
Hi, I'm Roger Strong. I'm here to tell you about Tidbits of Utah County. No death, divorce, devastation, or destruction, just good news for good people. You'll find us everywhere in Utah Valley, in doctors' offices, restaurants, mechanic shops, anywhere that people wait. We have over 35 features of fun, family-friendly entertainment. To find a paper or to advertise, call Roger at 801-616-6288. Again, that's Roger at 801-616-6288, or Tidbits of Utah County, the happy paper for Happy Valley.
Welcome back to It's Not Your Fault. I'm your host, Kim Power-Stilson, here with author Steve Shank, and we've been talking about his new book that's coming out, It's Not Your Fault, same name as the TV show, by the way, and the radio show. Thank you for joining us. So, Steve, before the break, we were talking about the relationship of Michael and the Guardian. You explained Michael. You said Michael is every man, and when he needs to be taught a lesson, the teacher appears. So the Guardian is the teacher. Tell us a little bit about your inspiration for the Guardian and what he helps Michael with.
Well, the Guardian is kind of an interesting guy because he's a person, yet he's supernatural. He links up telepathically with Michael sometimes, and he's always linked with the universal knowledge. He always has an answer for everything, and he's the kind of guy that you'd like to run into that you can ask any question you want to. Because when he first starts out, he says, "Okay, what do you want to know, Michael?" And Michael is kind of sitting there being all, Twitter-pated over what happened. And he says, "Well, I just want to know how things work." And really, isn't that what everyone wants to know? How things work. I spent a lot of time in sales, a good share of my life, which... looking at the gray hair, you can imagine it was a long time. But anyway,
And you're good
a
at
lot of but the way you do anything 1,000 times, you're bound to figure out how to do it. But the fact is that things that I learned, the times that I really struggled to figure out how things worked, were the times that I was starving. Were the times that I wasn't successful. There was a time, when I didn't have things going, and I prayed a lot, and you kind of feel like if there was somebody that all of a sudden would stump into your life, and you'd say, "Okay, this guy can walk next to me and answer my questions and can tell me how this works or why this works. When you have a busted relationship where people just don't get along at all, where you have they started out being all enamored with each other and they drift apart. There's a principle called distance is disaster. Why is it that when people get a little bit miffed at each other, if you said something a little bit sideways to me and I took it wrong and I said something sideways back, pretty soon you'd see that Kim and I were no longer in the picture because I'd be on this side and she'd be on that side of the screen, and we didn't want to be next to each other. And if we were riding in a pickup truck, you'd have to scrape her off the other side of the other door of the pickup truck with a spatula to even come close to me, because people, as soon as they start not to feel good about themselves. Now think about this. Why is it that you don't want to be around somebody that makes you mad, that has just aggravated you or just accused you of something? How do you feel about it? You don't feel good about yourself. And so you're saying, this person does not make me feel good about me, so therefore I don't want to be there to feel any more pain, because they're going to say, you should have shown up on time. You didn't comb your hair. You didn't brush your teeth. You kind of smell funny. And how does that make me feel? Worse and worse and worse. So I'm not going to be around that anymore. I don't like that. That's not fun. And so that's how people work. And so distance is disaster is a law. You check it out. Think about the last time you had a little bit of a tiff with your mate or your companion, your partner or whatever. What'd you do? Moved away.
Exactly.
Some people totally vacate the area. They run away. And that really aggravates the other person, because you won't stand and fight. Well, who wants to stand and fight? It's kind of stupid. And there's another principle that's kind of interesting that comes up, and it's human nature. Just to show you how we are basically functioning from something called the law of me. How I feel about me. You and I have a little bit of a tiff, Kim. We kind of get, I didn't
That's
count
how it
on
goes
that.
in my house.
That
We're Irish.
That kind of guy, Irish. Oh, I don't have a chance. I give.
That's right.
No, anyway, we have a little bit of tiff, and we get the distance thing, and we just don't kind of feel good about ourselves. And then we finally, go through the accusation, and one of us decides, well, I want to get this fixed, and so one of us breaks the silence and does whatever. Finally, we get it made up. 45 minutes after we've made up and gotten it over with, if you were to ask either one of us, in 90+% of the cases, what the fight was about, we probably couldn't tell you. Because what happens is you said something that made me feel bad about myself. So I couldn't allow that. So I say something to make you feel bad about yourself. Well, you do that too.
That happens a lot with children.
Oh, yeah. You want to. Why did the Savior say, be like unto little children? Watch kids. You see honesty, You see honesty. We have adults that play games, and they aren't honest with each other, and so as a result, a lot of relationships don't have a chance because one's playing this game and the other's playing this game, and they're not playing by the same rules, and so you can never win a base football game.
So I have a question then. If distance is disaster, then people that start slinging arrows from a distance, then there isn't really much chance of them, like, political candidates, let's say.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. Really stupid.
So they're slinging arrows from a distance, but if you put them in the same room, you're saying they might be friends.
If you get to know the person. That's why in negotiations, the most important thing to do is before you start negotiating, you get to know the person. Hey, how many kids you got? What's your wife do? You're both working. What's happening here and what's happening there? Where do you live? Get to know each other. It's not just all horse bucky. It's very important that we know each other, and we try to do that. Anytime that we're getting acquainted with someone, the first thing we want to do is find out about them. And the best way to find out about them is get them talking about themselves and how do they like us, because their favorite subject is, guess what? themselves.
That's true.
And so the person that makes friends the easiest and best is the one that gets other people to tell them about themselves, and then they have a tremendous advantage. There's a reason that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and I don't apply this very often, but it's so that you can listen twice as much as you talk. And so if some of the teenagers out there that are having difficulty with building relationships and having friends with all this foolishness of the electronics that are destroying society today, society today, if they just want to know how to be the most popular person, how to make friends best, go in and ask other kids about themselves, get them to tell them about themselves, and you see, you will get to know them and like them, and they sense that your interest makes them feel good about themselves. They can tell all the good stuff that they do and what they like and what they don't like and what the experiences that they had. And when you're telling a story about yourself and what happened, you really feel good about yourself. And if somebody's listening, it makes you feel even better about yourself. And so that's why when you've had a tiff, when you get done, you've been in your own little world, fighting your battle, protecting your little ego, and the other person has been in their own little world. That's why when you get done with the discussion or the argument, you can't tell what the fight was about, because you were fighting your battle, they were fighting their battle, and there the twain shall meet.
So
Now, if distance is disaster, let me ask you a question. If distance is disaster, what is the antithesis of that? What's the opposite? If you don't want a disaster, what do you do? What's the opposite of distance?
closeness, nearness.
Yeah. And you know what? What's the closest you can get? It's called a
Hug.
what is it?
Hug.
Very good.
Very good.
They say that for people to be emotionally sound, they literally need about 8 hugs a day. Now, you don't have to go up and physically give someone a hug, but if you can give someone a verbal hug, a mental hug, a look hug, whatever, a hug. So if distance is disaster, how do you get rid of a disaster? You get closer.
Space.
Okay, so most of these couples that are having their arguments out there and having their little tiffs, and she doesn't like this and he doesn't like that, and they're completely ignoring the courtship process that they went through when they got together with each other, which saw no evil, saw no negative, saw nothing bad, but only saw the good, notwithstanding what their parents were trying to point out about that jerk that you. Anyway, I'm talking about my own experience, but that's another story. But the fact is that if those couples, once the tiff starts, if they would just stop, one of them would stop. There's a story about the Wonder Hugger in the book, and her husband wanted to go play softball, and he did that, and he completely ignored her, and anything that she would say that would challenge the softball thing, he'd get up and storm out and stuff. And one time she read about the Wonder Hugger concept, and she went over and grabbed him, just held on, didn't resolve the argument, didn't say anything more, just went over and grabbed him and held on, and he's trying to extricate himself from this crazy woman that had just attacked him. And finally he kept trying to get away from her and head for the garage for the car, and by the time they got done, she's hanging around for dear life around one leg, holding it with his foot, and he looks down and he finally sees the humor of the thing and just cracks up, and it was over with. And you see, they become one again by closeness, not allowing the distance. Don't allow the distance.
I think that's excellent advice, and I've been running through this for moms. I think for families, this is a great book. I've been running through this chapter by chapter with my kids and teaching them some of these concepts and finding out what they thought of them. And I taught my kids that distance is disaster. And my son will every single day come up to me and give me a hug, and with his sisters, and he get in a fight, he'll stay right on them. Now, it's a little annoying too.
Yeah.
But he's like right on him. And it's been amazing to see how many fights it's resolved. I mean, one person making that effort, the sister will scream a little at him, get away from me, a bad breath, or whatever, right? But he'll just stay there until it's resolved, and eventually she laughs. I mean, you
Yeah.
just have to have a little patience, though. Doesn't happen immediately.
Because
Great advice, though, Steve.
what is she fighting for? What is she angry about? Okay. Anger. Interesting concept. This is a concept that the Guardian brought to Michael, and he stated it this way. Anytime you see anger or judgmentalism, you are always, never failing, you are always looking directly into the eyes of guilt. Whoa, okay. So you're saying, what is this girl guilty about? What could she be? She's mad at her brother. He's a little twerp, he's a typical little brother, a pain in the butt, whatever. But what's she aggravated about? What's she guilty about? And you'd be surprised where guilt comes from. And if you understand the principle, anytime someone's angry with you, anytime they're judgmental of you, you are always looking into their eyes, into the eyes of guilt. And we can prove it, and that will be very interesting for another segment. But it's a good concept.
Well, I'm looking forward to that part. Now, you are listening to Steve Shank. He's the author and the host of this show, It's Not Your Fault. It's here every single week. You can find us on Tuesdays live and out across the web. You can find us on Facebook, too. Now, we are going to go to a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the philosophies of the nature of man. So stay tuned for more. We'll be right back.
Folks, have you ever realized that freedom is spelled F-O-O-D? Food. After air and water, food is our greatest dependency. Taking control of that dependency ensures personal power, independence, and freedom. We can't control earthquakes, storms, martial law, dollar crash inflation, the global warming hoax, farm and garden restrictive legislation, job loss, crop failures, or the 2012 planet disruptions. However, if we have our own food, none of these can control us. Hunger can never be used to control you if you never are forced to stand in a bread line because you do not have your own bread. It seems the only freedom we still have control of is possession of food. If we don't control our own food, events are rapidly moving to use food to control us. Freedom truly is spelled F-O-O-D. Contact efoodsdirect.com or call 800-409-5633. That's efoodsdirect.com or 800-409-5633.
Welcome back to It's Not Your Fault with Steve Shank, the book author. It's a great book. You will see it in stores in the autumn, and also the big conference that you will be teaching will be coming in October. We're very excited about that.
I am too.
So Steve
I
Shank
get to find out if I really know anything.
Oh, and you do. Now, you can get this book. You can also see posts about this book on Facebook. Look for It's Not Your Fault TV show, and also look for Steve Shank on Facebook. And you have some great Steve Shankisms that people love.
Steve Shank.
Give us an example. Before we get into the philosophies of the nature of man, just give us an example of Steve Shankisms.
If you don't want what somebody else has got, you better do something different than they do.
Perfect.
That's
There
a
you
good
go.
one.
I like the one with the peach and the hog.
Oh, happier than a hog in a peach orchard?
Yeah, that's funny. You can find those on Facebook, and they're really funny.
Running like a one-arm paper hanger in a windstorm? These all come just naturally because I don't know. It's the way I live my life.
Well, and
I've had to describe it.
you grew up in Minnesota, right?
Yeah.
And
I
you're-
escaped.
And you escaped.
I did,
You
yeah.
actually went to the University of Minnesota and St. Cloud
That's true.
University.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my family, my mom's side comes from Minnesota, and they always speak in these really fun idiomatic expressions that make people laugh when you think about them for a minute.
Oh, okay.
So it might be a Minnesota thing.
Well, maybe that's because of the Swedes and Norwegians and a few Germans thrown in, It's,
That's right. That's right. My family are all Norwegians, so
Oh, my gosh. Okay.
that explains a lot. And Irish on the other side. So
Irish and Norwegian. Ooh.
So back to, from Steve Shankisms, again, you can find those on Facebook. So back to the book, It's Not Your Fault. We've talked about Michael, everyday man, who represents us, and the guardian who comes in. He's a teacher that answers and teaches when the question's asked, when it's the right time. Then we talked about the guardian and what the guardian, some of the examples of what the guardian is teaching Michael. So now we're going to talk about the philosophies on the nature of man. And you covered that a little in your book, and when people come to your conference, they'll get to see that too. But just give us a kind of a brief idea of what you talk about in the book regarding this.
What people don't realize, remember I said earlier in the show that the big problem that we have among teenagers, among everybody in our society, is the issue of self-image, how they feel about themselves. People do everything in their life based on how they feel about themselves, and if that image is flawed based on a concept called approval, which, think about this now, any of you that are taking notes, write this down. Here's the way it goes. Approval, as a principle, is the exact antithesis, or opposite, for those of you from Minnesota, the opposite of unconditional love. Think about it. Okay, so we live in an approval-based society. People have learned to be victims of the approval system. And let me tell you probably what I consider the worst example of this approval mania that just drives me nuts, and I'm going to make some enemies by saying this. These little girl beauty contests, okay? They doll these little girls up, put makeup on them, and pretty them all up so that they're just little Cupid dolls. And then they're taught that they go and compete with other little girls that are trying to be Cupid dolls, and then the judges either approve of them and they win, or they disapprove of them to the extent that they lose either sooner or later, because there can only be one winner. So you have 20 little girls all dressed up, and they're 5, 6 years old, and they're being taught that their worth is based on what someone else ranks them compared to other people's appearance. No brains, no achievements, no nothing, except just how they look. And then we wonder why we have teenagers getting bulimic and trying to be thinner than thin, and be all disgusted with how they look. They never look quite right for themselves, rather than trying to develop into who they can be and the magnificent individual that they are. Everything is based on the facade of looking good rather than being good. And you see, in a contest like that, I used to run sales organizations, and most sales organizations have a sales board. Your top salesman, and then the guy that sold not quite as much last night, and the guy that sold nothing last night. And so who's the winner? There's only one winner. What's that say to everybody else? You're a loser. Okay, you got 20 little girls. One's going to be the queen. Okay, so she's the queen, and what you've got is 19 other losers. You've got a runner-up. How's it feel to be a runner-up? Well, you're good, but you're not good enough. And the second runner-up, well, you're good, but you're definitely not good enough to be quite good enough to be good enough. So what's the message? We wonder why we have teenagers that are running around primping and showing and being airheads. Who knows? Well, this is what we've got. We have young children growing up seeking their parents' approval, the preacher's approval, the government's approval, the school's approval, everybody's approval. And so that's why you have a situation like I had in freshman philosophy class at the University of Minnesota. We were in an old building. I was in summer school, and they didn't happen to have air conditioning. This was back before air conditioning was invented, I think. I'm not sure. They had a horse-drawn fan. Anyway, and so we're in this room that had a blackboard and a blackboard and a blackboard and windows, and a door. The door was closed, the windows were closed, and it was a July day because I was taking summer school. And the professor was perspiring, and we were all sitting there roasting, and I got up, went over, opened up a couple of the windows, and then went and opened the door. And I went back and sat down in my seat, which is kind of toward the back of the room, and the professor stopped. He looked at me, looked at the door, looked at the windows, said, "Thank you." We live in a society where people don't do what makes sense because nobody else is doing it. Now you want a Steveism, this is the horse manure principle. Okay? People live by the horse manure principle in a lot of things that they do. And it goes like this. Eat horse manure, 150 billion flies can't be wrong. This is the argument that you parents have had your teenagers bring up to you all the time. Well, everybody's doing it. And of course your response is, well, if everybody jumped off a cliff, would you jump too? That doesn't work quite well. But the fact is, this is how we think. Right now, a lot of advertising and a lot of information that's being put out by legitimate companies to let people know about their product is being totally negated because people are shifting over to a concept that's very interesting. Nothing wrong with it, but it's interesting, and it talks about the horse manure principle. In effect, it is an example of it. Here's the way it goes. What's the rating on that TV show? What's the rating on that candy bar? Let's look it up and Google it and find out how many stars that particular bra has. Okay, that's great. And so what people are doing is they're not deciding for themselves. They're not saying, okay, that's a good candy bar. It's got the ingredients I want. I'll just eat the candy bar. They're looking up Google and saying, how many stars does it have?
Yeah, what are other people saying about it?
People need to become themselves. And the whole idea behind the magnificence of human beings is not only will we get to know and love someone else if we get close to them, but very simply, if we get to understand how things work, how we function, and what we really are, we can truly love ourselves. And that, oddly enough, when it's not your fault, and you can get rid of the guilt that gets in the way of self-flagellation and beating yourself up, if you can get rid of that guilt by understanding how things work and who you really are as a human being, how magnificent every single soul is, then all of a sudden, guess what? You discover that the things that others would have you feel guilty about because they didn't approve of that about you, you say, okay, so hang it in your nose, buddy. Me am who me am. My mom used to have an interesting statement. You know, God started the whole thing out. In the scriptures, he refers to himself this way. I am who I am. I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am who I am. My mom had a different way of putting it. She was one of these little gals. She's a farm wife, and we used to go to the Methodist Church in Anoka, Minnesota, and that was the church of choice for all of the upper class women in the church. Now, she would sit there and she crocheted. She made doilies and phenomenal stuff. She was just a wonderful woman, but she was a person of few words. But when she said something, she would just basically cut everybody off at the knees, and there was nothing more to be said. Mom was not the type of person that, after everything has been said, she'd say something more. No, she said the last thing, and that was all there was to be said, because that was the kind of wisdom that she had. And if anyone would ever challenge her, she'd just say, me am who me am. That was enough for her. And you see, if people can get to the point where they understand how they function, that everything is really about how they feel about themselves and how they make others feel about themselves when they're around, then very simply they can have the confidence to say, hey, it's hot and nasty in here. I'm going to go open the stinking window and open the door and be comfortable. Got nothing to do with interrupting the class. It's just about, it's ridiculous to sit here just because everybody else is doing it. And people will be able to say about themselves, me am who me am, just like Mom did.
Excellent advice. And Steve, I hope there's, mothers out there that will have their kids listen to this too, because I think that's something that you've made me think. I have to decide if I'm really being who I am, if I'm really being true to that, or listening to the dictates of Google or other people. You're listening to the It's Not Your Fault show. You have been listening to author Steve Shank. I'm your host, Kim Power-Stilson, as well, and we are live here. Hope you're watching us from Facebook or anywhere listening to us on the radio station. We're going to go to a brief commercial break, and after that, we're going to come back and talk about the folks that sponsor our show, and as well, we're going to have Steve answer questions that were sent in by some listeners for The Guardian. So that's a new segment on the show. So we'll be right back with more after this.
I'll have to start channeling The Guardian here.
Folks, have you ever realized that freedom is spelled F-O-O-D? Food. After air and water, food is our greatest dependency. Taking control of that dependency ensures personal power, independence, and freedom. We can't control earthquakes, storms, martial law, dollar crash inflation, the global warming hoax, farm and garden restrictive legislation, job loss, crop failures, or the 2012 planet disruptions. However, if we have our own food, none of these can control us. Hunger can never be used to control you if you never are forced to stand in a bread line because you do not have your own bread. It seems the only freedom we still have control of is possession of food. If we don't control our own food, events are rapidly moving to use food to control us. Freedom truly is spelled F-O-O-D. Contact efoodsdirect.com or call 800-409-5633. That's efoodsdirect.com or 800-409-5633.
And welcome back to It's Not Your Fault, hosted by Steve Shank, and I'm the co-host, Kim Power-Stilson. We're excited to be here talking with Steve about his book. We've talked about Michael, Everyday Man, and the Guardian, who teaches him through these scenarios, which are present in the chapters in your book. And everyone's excited to not only get the book, which comes out this autumn, but also attend the class in October. So for more information, go to Facebook and look for It's Not Your Fault radio and TV show and Steve Shank. So let's, and by the way, this show is nicely sponsored by eFoods Direct. It's a company that offers these incredible meals. You can have easy-to-fix meals that are clean and healthy for your family. They're great. I've eaten them for a year, and I love them. My kids make dinner. So for you moms who are busy, great. For you businessmen, you can open up the bag of eFoods, add hot water, and go. So thank you for sponsoring. Now, Steve, we're saying it's fun. Before we get back into talking about the questions for The Guardian that listeners and viewers have sent in, today it's a special day today.
Okay, what's special about today?
It's National Ice Cream Day.
Ice Cream Day.
It's National Ice Cream Day.
They have a National Ice Cream Day.
There's a National Ice Cream Day, and it's today. So whenever you're watching the show, you'll have to look on Facebook to find out when the actual day is. But it's today. And so we thought we would share a recipe that will be great for your family to celebrate. And it has to do with the eFoods Direct Almond Coconut Granola. You can buy that and add it with your ice cream for a delicious dessert.
It does very well.
Okay. Do you like the granola?
I pick the granola. What do you mean, do I like the granola?
Steve Shank is a food expert, and he founded that company, which is sponsoring the show. So it's such a tasty granola, and it is so fresh, and you just add it to ice cream.
There's a concern with granola. You have to understand that one of the most difficult things to do is to deal with food that has no hydrogenated oil in it. And granola typically is very, very fraught with that type of stuff, and to get the kind of flavors that we have and the kind of texture that is there, it takes a lot of research and a lot of work to come up with something that is that good. But this granola, if you take a good scoop of really good ice cream, I'm really a nut on ice cream. We used to make it. We raised Jersey cattle back home on the farm, and we used to make homemade ice cream. And it's hard to find good ice cream. But if you take really good ice cream and just take a scoop of this granola and put over it, and then it soaks it up a little bit.
Maybe a
and
little
it's-
fresh strawberries.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's really good. How much longer do we have here? We get
We'll be right back.
there. You go. No, it's good stuff.
Well, if you want to find out more about this really good stuff, this coconut almond granola from eFoods Direct, all you have to do is go to efoodsdirect.com, and you can click and look at the blogs there and read about this, and you can also go right to shop and find the granola, and it's a great price, and it is the best granola I have ever eaten. My kids beg me to order it every month, and I do. But
Well, that's
the
a good
ice cream
thing.
is new, so we'll have to try that on them tonight. They're going to think I'm the best mom in the world.
You probably are.
I probably
If you're feeding your kids eFoods Direct food, you are the best mom in the world.
Well, it's clean food, so I know that, which is nice. Thank you for giving us clean food, Steve. And thank you to eFoods Direct. And go to the Facebook site, and we'll have the recipe for the yummy granola ice cream there. Okay, so this part of the show is where viewers and listeners can write in and ask questions about the Guardian. And so these are questions that, Steve, you're going to, like you said, channel the Guardian and answer these questions.
You better
for
be
everyone.
careful with that. Some people out there know what channeling is, and
Oh.
it might not be good.
I just mimicked what
I
you
don't.
said.
I
so
don't
sorry.
really channel anything. I just come up with stuff off the top of my head.
But since you wrote the book and you created the Guardian, you'll know the answers to these questions, right?
theoretically, let's find out what the questions are first.
Okay, one of the questions came from a viewer that just watched last week. How will the show and book help with relationships, with my relationships?
It will enable people to realize that in any relationship, their concern is not as much about how they feel as how they make the other person feel. Because here's a principle that you'll hear about that you're going to really love, and you can use this as a guideline in any of your thinking. And in fact, before we even explain it to you, you can still use this as a kind of a litmus test for how you're doing in a relationship. If you and I are, talking and getting acquainted, and you want me to like you, the best way to do that is to help me to be able to say, hey, I like me best when I'm with you. And if you can say the same thing about me, if you can tell me, hey, I like me best, Steve, when I'm with you. And the way you do that is by being totally blind to any criticism, judgment, or evaluation of that person, because your evaluation doesn't matter to them. It doesn't count. Remember, the only thing about a relationship is how you make the other person feel about themselves. If I say to Kim, well, that's a good color on you, but I've seen better. Okay. How does it make her feel about herself? She doesn't give a rat's butt about what I think about what she's wearing. It's how I make her feel. If I say, man, that is a classy outfit, that just brings out your color phenomenally. She feels good about herself. She's going to like me. So, rule of thumb, if you want to determine how you're doing in a relationship, doesn't matter how you feel. It's how you make the other person feel about themselves. Because it's all about them to them, and it's all about you to you. But here's the secret. If I make Kim feel good about herself, guess what? She's going to find some way to make me feel good about myself. So it's all very self-motivated.
But it's true, right? You base it on true things, which I think is a really great point.
Yep.
We don't go out of our way to fabricate. We look for the good in people, right?
Yeah.
That's what you advocate.
Just be blind to the things that you don't approve of. Because nobody cares about your approval anyway. Let's go back to the little girl. The judge's approval doesn't mean anything to that little girl if she loves herself and knows how magnificent she is and how beautiful she is, no matter whether she has the stringy little brunette hair or the fluffy blonde hair. Who cares? Who cares?
Okay, great answer. Now we have time, I think just enough time for one more question. Now this comes in from a listener. What about the phrase, absence makes the heart grow stronger, in response to the distance is disaster?
Distance is
Where does
disaster.
that come from?
Absence does make the heart grow stronger, and distance is disaster. They're both true. But there's also another one that's a fact. Have you ever heard of a Dear John letter? Okay. A lot of guys that went off to the military, having sworn to love their sweetheart forever, and she's going to wait for him. Or we're in Utah, ever gone on a mission, and a couple months later, Dear John. Okay. That's distance. That's disaster. There's a song in the play. It's a musical, South Pacific.
Great. Great job.
When I'm not near the girl I love the girl I'm near. Distance is disaster,
Yeah.
closeness works. So here's the way distance doesn't become disaster, and it can allow the heart to grow fonder. Those who have had the experience of distance making the heart grow fonder have nurtured the relationship. They have written the letters to keep the closeness. They have made the telephone calls. They have fantasized about phenomenal love-making hot sessions that they can't wait to get to. Well, it's true. There's
missionary
nothing
though.
wrong with that.
Right.
And that's not even X-rated. Now, if I told you, never mind. But anyway, so you see, it's what you choose to nurture. If you allow distance to be disaster, it will be. Mothers and daughters have not spoken for 10 years because of some little slight that someone perceived was a cut against them, and they didn't approve of what the other person. I know a gal whose daughter won't have anything to do with her because she is accepting of her other daughter who drinks. Who is not a member of the same church, who drinks, and the mother should be judgmental of that girl. Otherwise, she's not going to be approved, so she doesn't talk to her. That's how stupid things get. So you can allow distance to be disaster, but guess what? If both parties want to keep the closeness, they'll find some way. They'll write every day. They'll call every day. When he gets back to the hotel after a long day's work out selling, he calls his wife before he goes to sleep. Hi, sweetheart, I love you. I miss you. Can't wait to hold you. And she writes him a little note or texts him. Texting is wonderful in many respects. I get a little text note, from Sylvia that says, I love you. You're not as big as jerk as you could be, And it's no, she never says that. But
Yeah, I can imagine.
just kidding. But you see, distance is disaster. Distance makes the heart grow fonder. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. It's all in the emphasis you put on the right syllable. Is what you can do with what you got. What do you want? Do you want to keep it alive? Or do you want to have a roving eye and go find something better that will not be any better, could not be? And you see, people mess with appearances. Do we have a couple minutes just real quickly?
No, we're just about out of time.
We're just about out of time. All right.
But next week we can talk about that. So next week we'll talk about one of the next segments of chapters in your book. We have lots of them to choose from, and it will be great. So we're really looking forward to it. And again, thanks to eFoods, our sponsor. And you can find Steve Shank on Facebook. SteveShank.me is his blog, and as well you can find the show It's Not Your Fault TV. And you can find out more about the book coming out this fall soon. The new book cover is out. Wait till you see it.
It's really cool.
It's very, very cool. So you'll like to check it out. So
It's just like the author, the ultimate in cool.
Bravo. Well, thank you for joining us on It's Not Your Fault. It's been a couple of great aha moments for you. We hope you enjoyed the show. And please tune in again next week. We'll be right here.
Yes, do. We will be right here doing the same thing, talking.